Okay, for the quiche Lorraine, we need to make the pastry first. So in my bowl I've got 150 grams of plain flour, and then I have 75 grams of fat in here. It's always half fat to flour for normal short crust pastry, which is what we're making, and I am using 40 grams of butter and 35 grams of white vegetable fat today. So I'm just going to roughly chop that up in the bowl. Make sure that it's all in there. And then this needs to be rubbed in using the fingertips only until the mixture looks like breadcrumbs. So remembering to keep your hands like scoops, you scoop down into the bowl, lift some fat and flour and rub thumbs over fingertips, allowing the mixture to drop back into the bowl as you do it. That way the mixture will be helped to stay cool, because everything for pastry making should be cold. If you need to move the bowl, put your hands inside the bowl and twist, and try not to keep rubbing in the same area, and you just keep going until you cannot see any large lumps of fat. And while you're doing this, the palms of your hands should remain clean. So just dropped a bit of fat on there, and I'm just going to finish this off and then show you what it should look like when it's done. Okay, I've rubbed that in and I've washed my hands, and there are a few lumps on the top, but actually if you shake your bowl, all the biggest lumps will rise to the top. And because it's quite warm today, I can actually feel that that's not lumps of fat, that's where the pastry is starting to stick together. So for 150 grams of pastry, or 150 grams of flour, you normally add 1 teaspoon of water for every 25 grams of flour that you have. So I have 6 lots of 25 grams. I'm going to start by adding 2 tablespoons of water to my bowl and just giving it a stir. And this is when you need to use your own judgment, because depending on how dry the flour is, how hot the weather is, you might find that 2 tablespoons is not enough and you need to add a little bit more. And as I say, you need to learn to use your own judgment. Now I can see that that is starting to stick together into larger pieces, so I'm going to put my hands in and feel, and for me that 2 tablespoons of water is enough, and I can get this into one dough, and at the same time making sure that I have nothing left in the bowl. So 2 tablespoons of water was enough there. You do need to squeeze your dough through and make sure that it is a ball and there is nothing left in the bowl. And then on a worktop, I'm just going to knead this lightly. Now this pastry is going to be baked blind, so I'm going to bake it first of all without a filling in it, and I am going to put it in a 7-inch sandwich tin. So because my tin is round, I need my pastry to be roughly in a round before I start. If I start off with a square shape, I'm going to have loads of extra pastry. What I do need is a little bit more flour on my worktop before I start, but not all of it, and I'm just going to rub the top of this with flour. So rolling your pastry, really important, roll once away from you and give a small turn. Only ever roll once away from you if you can and give a turn. And if you turn your pastry every time you have rolled it, and I'm spreading my hand flat to turn my pastry now, if you roll it every time you've turn it every time you've rolled it, you'll feel if your pastry starts to stick. And I have a few cracks at the edge of the pastry, which I'm not really going to worry about. What I am going to do now is just put a little bit more pastry, a little more flour underneath, and just rub a little bit of flour into the top, because I need to get this to be roughly 2 centimetres bigger than the size of my tin. And the fact that it's not a perfect round now doesn't matter, but I roughly have 2 centimetres extra pastry all the way around the size of my tin. The first time you roll your pastry, it will be at its best. If it was a little bit dry and you scrunch it up and try to roll it again, what happens is all the flour that's on the worktop gets worked into that as well, and it will be even more dry when you roll it again. Pastry can get stressed quite easily, so we just want to try and roll it once. And there are various ways of lifting this large piece of pastry to go into your tin. So you can, if you wish, put your rolling pin in the middle of the pastry, wrap your pastry around it, put your tin very close, lift it up and unroll it on the top. If you've made a good batch of pastry and you're feeling confident, what you can do is use your fingers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide my hands under the pastry, both sides, and then I'm going to fan my fingers out, spread my fingers out as wide as possible so that I can pick the pastry up and support it. When the pastry goes into the tin, the really important thing is that you do not then just press it down at the edges. What you need to do, because you've stretched this pastry as you rolled it, you need to lift the pastry and put it square with the bottom of the tin. So as I'm doing this, I lift my pastry up and I actually push it to the bottom of the tin to make sure that I can get as much of the filling in there as possible. Then I'm just gently folding that pastry over the edge of the tin, and I am going to trim it. And to trim it, you use the back of a knife. You hold the knife at a 45-degree angle to the tin, and you just run your knife around the outside edge. If you've got a lot of spare pastry, it's not a good idea to hold it as high as you can. I tend to hold mine quite close to the worktop, because if you have a lot of extra pastry, that spare pastry can actually pull this out of the tin. Now that, around the edges, does not look particularly neat and tidy. So you can use a fork or anything else that you choose to make an edge around this tin. I'm just going to use my fingers quickly, and then, as I say, I'm going to bake this blind. And baking pastry blind for a quiche hopefully will help you avoid having a soggy bottom to this, because the pastry is already cooked. Your pastry needs to cook on a higher temperature than the filling. So what I need is a fork, and I'm just going to lightly prick the bottom of the pastry so that when it cooks, and around the edges, any large air bubbles hopefully won't come through. It's just lightly prick the bottom. What you don't want to do is stick your fork in and make big holes in it, because then all your filling will leak out. And to bake blind, we need something to support the edges of this pastry. As soon as it goes into the oven, the fat in the pastry will melt. It's the first thing that happens, and your sides can collapse. So at school we would use greaseproof paper and baking beans, which you would scrunch into your tin. I don't have baking beans at home, so at home I tend to use a piece of foil, and I just need to scrunch it so that it sits around the edge of the tin. So the whole point of it is that it keeps the sides up for me. So this is going to go into a hot oven, 200 degrees, for 15 minutes, and then after 15 minutes I'm going to check it and see how cooked the pastry is. While the pastry for the quiche is cooking, I've cleared my worktop quickly and I'm going to make a start on the filling so that I am ready when the quiche is cooked. So, small onion, cut it in half, remember, and then peel the skin off. It's easier to peel an onion if you've cut it in half first. So just take off the outside layer that looks dry or just looks unpleasant, looks like it's starting to dry out, and leave the root on and both ends. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take one end off the onion. I'm keeping the root end there because it will help to keep the onion together, and then using claw grip, remember, through your fingers nearly to the end of the onion, but not quite, so that when you pick it up by the root it stays together. So it stays together and it's nice and easy for you to cut. Then turn round, bridge hold and cut across the onion. It's quite good if you can get smallish pieces of onion. Not only do they cook more quickly, but I think in your quiche it's a bit nicer. End of the onion, throw that away. So traditionally Quiche Lorraine has onion and bacon, so I'm going to do just one small onion. If you've got a large onion, you can just do half. If you have other vegetables that you want to put in your quiche, that's absolutely fine. You can use mushrooms, broccoli, roasted tomatoes, whatever you would like. And I have some streaky bacon, and my streaky bacon I'm just going to cut into small pieces. I'm not going to do that on my vegetable board, but I'm going to use about 3 slices of streaky bacon, and I'm just going to cut across with my scissors like that, or you can chop it so that you've got small bits of bacon that will cook quite quickly. The onion is going to take longer to cook than the bacon, so I'm going to cook the onion first in just about a teaspoon of oil. I don't want to make this too greasy, until it's translucent. Then I'll stir the bacon in and take it off the heat. Okay, while I've been making my filling, the pastry has started to cook. You can see that it's puffed up a little bit, and that's partly why you put the foil on, to help stop that from happening. But you can also see, hopefully, that it's starting to brown around the edges of the tin, and it's shrunk away from the edge of the tin. In the bottom it still looks a little bit undercooked in places, but the edges are starting to brown. So I'm just going to pop that back in the oven again, without the foil this time, just for 5 more minutes to finish cooking. And while that's doing, you can continue with your filling. So I've grated my cheese, I've cooked my onion and my bacon together in the saucepan, and the last thing that I need to do is to get the egg and milk mixture together. So I have 150 mils of milk and 1 egg, and that's all you need for your filling. You can, if you wish, add some pepper to this. I wouldn't add any salt because you've got salt in the cheese and there will be salt in the bacon. And you just need to whisk your egg and milk together until it's nice and smooth and we've broken up that thick bit of egg white a little bit. If you wish to, you can add a bit of pepper to this. It's personal preference. If you don't like too much pepper, don't bother to put it in. But now I'm ready to go when the pastry is cooked. Okay, the pastry case is now a light golden brown on the bottom, and we've got a light golden brown on the edge. So I'm just going to pop that on the worktop so that I can put the filling in. and then this can go back into the oven. So on the bottom of here I'm going to put the bacon and onion and spread that out. Then I'm going to add the grated cheese on the top. So grated cheese over there, and I think that is actually enough. And then pour in the egg and milk. And the egg and milk, you want to make sure that it doesn't rise up above the top of your pastry, or it will go down the side of your tin and make your quiche stick. So you should have just enough. I think that's just about it. Otherwise it's going to go over. There we go. Perfect fit. And then this goes back into the oven, and because the pastry is already cooked and I don't want it to brown anymore, I've turned the oven down to 140, and this should take about 25 minutes to cook through. Okay, the quiche Lorraine is cooked. When you shake the tin, it doesn't move, it's set in the middle, and it is just starting to brown on the top. Don't want it to be too dark, but a little bit of browning is good, and you can see the pastry around the edge is done. So that quiche is cooked when you shake and it doesn't wobble.